Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusion Starts Now podcast. I am so excited for all of the interviews we have scheduled so far. It is going to be such a good year of interviews. So, we are starting off strong with Tim. I am so excited for you to hear what we have to say. We talk about the Department of Education and what it might look like for organizations like him who are in a nonprofit supporting public schools. Um, and yeah, it's a great conversation. And he really put me at ease personally. So I hope you learn a lot from him. If you want to reach out to Tim or his group that he works with, make sure to check all the links below. And we also have a director's cut version of this podcast. So if you hear it and you're like, oh man, I want to hear the rest of their questions they had together, then you need to go. Again, this is going to be linked below to Coffee, KO-FI. And if you are a subscriber for seriously just $3 a month, you will get the unedited versions of all the interviews. And by unedited, I mean they'll be edited, but like longer. So you'll get to enjoy them all. So, I guess this episode today is going to be sponsored by my ability to not give up, apparently. And I don't know. Keep going. I hope you keep going too, because you inspire me every day. So there it is. Enjoy the conversation, and I will talk to you at the end.
I woke up super early today because I feel like I was nervous that I was the one hosting you on my podcast.
Oh, please. We're just having a conversation.
I know, but I was up at like 4:50. I was
Oh
like,
my
well,
gosh.
I'm up. Well, also my 4-year-old was like on top of me and I was on the edge of my bed and I'm like, ah, whatever. I'm gonna get up and wash my bangs. Um, anyways, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Uh, yeah, absolutely. So first of all, Kayla, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. And my name is Tim Villegas. I'm the Director of Communications for the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education.
And how long have you been working for them?
This is my fifth year in August of 2024. So a little over 4 years. Yeah.
Okay. And then were you teaching right before MCIE?
I was working for a school district. I taught 16 years. I was a special educator for 16 years, four in California, the rest in Georgia, and the last 3 years in a school district, I was a district support specialist. So I supported a number of schools across the county um, with behavior support, support for students with intellectual disabilities and for autism. So it was sometimes those students were in like segregated self-contained classes, sometimes they were included. So it was really just whatever school I was assigned to, I supported those particular learners and teachers.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
didn't realize that you were in so many different states.
I mean, I grew up in California, so that's where I lived for a long time, and then I got my first job in the Pasadena Unified School District, and then we moved to Georgia in 2008. So, and I've lived here because I live in the Atlanta area. It's been 16 and a half years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I even felt like it was being at different schools in California. I just couldn't believe how different every school operated.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And this is my first time living in a different state. Like I was in California for uh over 30 years. I don't know when I moved. But
Right.
I mean, I've only been here for a couple of years in Washington, and already it's just like so different seeing the different cultures at, I mean, at first different schools, but like it's super different going to a different state.
Yeah. It took a little bit of getting used to. Probably for the first couple of years, I was like, well, this is how we did it in California, and
Oh, yeah.
this is how we do it in Georgia, and all that stuff. But
Yeah.
um, my experience, like, uh, how do you say it? Not intuitively, like I would have thought California would have had better schools just because I have that like West Coast bias.
Yeah.
But in generally speaking, I feel like Georgia does a better job um, with supporting educators just in
Oh.
general. Like there's still a lot of nuance in there with like students with disabilities and like um equity and like just treating everyone a certain way.
Yeah.
but I like we were able to live uh and work and send our kids to pretty good schools in Georgia. So and my kids go to public school here.
Yeah.
Um and so we've really thrived here. California is just it's so expensive.
Yeah.
Um it's overregulated, and I'm a liberal, so
Yeah.
and I
Oh
think it's
yeah.
overregulated. So like there's a lot of things that's wrong with it. So we're very happy to move to Georgia.
Yeah. Well, that's good because today I want to talk about the Department of Education and because I also identify as a liberal, but I have always felt like the school system could be better and like what drastic measures need to happen for that to happen. So how so you've worked at multiple schools. Have you ever noticed like how different funds are divided in all these different schools? Like as a teacher or
Yeah, my experience is more as a teacher. Um, and so I have a couple thoughts about that. Um, Sometimes what happens is school districts have pocket or buckets of money, and they're like, well, we can only use this money for this particular thing. Um, and let's say it's buckets of money for school improvement, like the actual what do you call it? The structure, like construction of buildings, of equipment, of hardware, of they can only use certain money just to improve the school building and the environment of the school. They can't use any of that money to hire more staff.
yeah,
Um, so and maybe that money is in the special education department and they can only use that money for professional learning. They cannot use it to hire more paraprofessionals or an additional
yeah,
special education teacher because of the FTE numbers, the full-time equivalent. And I'm not a good person to explain that because I was never involved with school budgeting, but there's all of these considerations. The districts that we've worked with, uh, there's something called like braiding of funding. And
mhm,
I'm not an expert in this, but I do know that some districts are able to um, wrap funding together to be able to pay for certain things. And that is how we have been able to work with some districts, is that they're able to braid funding, pay for professional learning, and then additional and then be able to hire staff and stuff like that. I
yeah,
don't know how that works, to be honest, because that's just not something that I'm involved with. But I do know that it happens, and it probably has to do with um, the procedures of the school district and
yeah,
probably even the school board, because the school board is really the school board has a lot of power, on the direction of the district, under
yeah,
the direction of the superintendent. So if they are all kind of on board, and then they're like, "This is the plan, and this is what we're doing," they can approve whatever they need to, and then move forward. And
yeah,
it's all like transparent, and because it's a public school, you have to have
yeah,
like a board meeting, and it's all like public information.
Yeah, and I do remember like different schools having different like especially when I was in Southern California, just like how much more like litigious they were and like I mean, I kind of want to say stingy with their funds, where
Mm.
like in Northern California, they were very much like, they like you could tell what their priorities were, and that they were like actively trying to do something that was supporting like I think the Bay or San Francisco, I think ended up doing like a bonus for paras, because so many paras were leaving, and they were like, if you stay, we will give you like this much money and we'll give you a raise. And so it like, they saw the problem and then they, attempted to fix it how they ever could. But but yeah, I don't know. I kind of feel like there's like the whole supply and demand of like, well, if this isn't a problem, or I don't know, if we can keep moving it through, we're just going to keep doing it. Like, yeah. And then like Washington seems really progressive, but I'm looking into joining like the board or just being more involved with the public school system here. And I'm on all these Facebook chats, and it's been really eye-opening of like just where the parent concerns are.
Mhm.
And like some of them, I'm just like, wow, you guys don't like this is actually not that big of a problem. But to me, like coming from a place where like it was a huge problem, I'm like, I don't know, I guess like this is a better problem to have, or like it's been really interesting. So yeah, I mean, I'm going to I attended the board meeting virtual, and I'm really excited. I'm going to go in person in January when they start back up. Um, so we'll see how that goes. I mean, education, and of course, there's been a lot of talk that like educators and nurses, it was really targeted towards women and like free labor to like, you know, there's a whole, I blame the patriarchy for a lot of things.
I mean, yeah,
Um,
100%.
but it's like, I mean, and going back to our talk about like the Department of Education and Trump saying that he wants to like get rid of it. Um, I don't know. I guess what are your like initial thoughts? Because you did that interview and you kind of like I felt like you talked me off the ledge that I was like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe we will be okay. And I'm gonna look into this more.
Yeah. I think that so big picture, I think it's highly unlikely that it will happen. I think that
Yeah.
I think that there's more, um, I think that I think that we've closer, we're as close as it's ever been for it to be dismantled. Yes.
Hmm.
Do I think it's likely? No. But even if it does, even if it is, um, well, it will be very disruptive for sure. But there's just some things that were like being talked about that I just don't think are very accurate. Like, I don't think that um, like students with disabilities will just stop getting services. Um, they will get like we still have the law. The law is a federal law. IDEA, as it's known now, was created in 1975. The Department of Education was created after that.
Yeah.
So even if the Department of Ed goes away, I think that IDEA will still be around. The big problem with the DOE like being dismantled is that states will probably receive block grants. And
What are
if
those?
states receive block, it just means that the grants will be less regulated, and the states will decide with less regulation. The states can use the money for different things, and
Yeah.
it may not be to support learners with disabilities. Um, and we already have so much variability by state on how they're implementing IDEA, it, it like getting rid of the DOE will um, create more disparity, in my opinion. Like the variability will be even more than it is now,
Yeah.
because at least with like the Office of Special Education Programs, you have some sort of federal entity that is um, like there's some sort of oversight. It's not a lot, like to be honest, there just isn't a lot of oversight to begin with. I mean, like the harshest thing that can happen is a an Office of Civil Rights, kind of recommendation for a state to do something. Um, and so with the Office of Civil Rights, um, it could weaken it could weaken like the protections if the DOE is dismantled. So um, I don't think we're gonna like if like the Trump administration can't get rid of the DOE by executive order. Like
Yeah.
it has to be a decision from Congress. It has to be voted on. And I just don't think that there's going to be the political will to do that. Um, what might happen is that there might be reform at the DOE, and one of the biggest reforms would probably be in higher ed, not K-12, because of just the funding and student loans and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which I'm certainly not an expert on. Really my lens is how is this going to affect students with disabilities.
Yeah.
So um, so I think funding is could be a problem, oversight could be a problem, um, and then uh, so I think it may indirectly impact learners with disabilities, but it really remains to be seen like how it will affect like educators. So um,
Yeah. I mean, I didn't
yeah.
feel like it would affect educators. So when I looked into a lot of stuff about the Department of Education, and as someone who's been in education for over a decade, it's pretty wild how much I did not know about it. Um, but yeah, that's it's like a lot of like politicians or just people who study all this stuff, they've pretty much said what you said, that for Congress to really take away like the Department of Education seems pretty unlikely. But they have talked about how there's like these three main groups within the Department of Education, and they could say like they're going to move them into different departments, um,
Yeah.
which I mean, I guess it's just really hard to tell like where because I don't because then so I was also going through all these different things of like so Title I schools, like how they have to have this percentage of children who are
Mm.
considered low income in their schools. And then to continue getting funding, they have to have these programs in place that are showing that these schools or that these students are like getting access to information and getting the appropriate accommodations. And and this is how I felt, especially at my last school, that all the little steps of like having to prove everything so much kind of felt like it was taking away from like teaching, that I had to like find these ways to like so much prove every little step I was doing, or else like I couldn't get a better curriculum in my school. Like it was, and I know that's like not the, like that's the only way that I can compare this like huge countrywide like laws and rules that we have to like a personal thing of being in a very controlled situation of where I was like I do feel like this actually happens quite often with teachers where they're like, we need more resource, like we need a better curriculum to do this. And then they get a curriculum and they're like, well, now you just gave me all this work to do. And that was like a school that I worked with for a little bit. And it was just, it's good. It's kind of hard to say like what would be right. Because I've also been in IEP meetings where I feel like the parent is asking for something that I'm like, that's like I feel like it's like how do you not abuse the system but also get what you actually need from it? Um,
Yeah, yeah, and I've been there. I've been there too in IEP meetings, and I
And really, out of all of the
yeah.
IEP meetings I've been in, there was only one person ever that I was like, okay, you're abusing the system. Like your child gets all the services. They are getting so much support. They have a one-on-one aide. Like you need to chill, which which I know is like probably the worst thing to say, and I hope nobody gets really mad at me for saying that. But I have been in so many IEPs with so many teams and so many people that are like, "Oh, this is the hard parent or something." And I'm like, "No, this parent is fighting for their child and that's awesome." Or they're advocating. Like even when I've had to like, have a IEP meeting after IEP meeting, those are fine when I feel like it's a genuine like
Yeah.
conversation and we're compromising and we're finding ways to make it work. Out of all of those hundreds of IEP meetings, only one parent that I was like, no. So I guess I really shouldn't be saying that a lot of people are abusing the system because I'm sure most people are just trying to get
Yeah, yeah.
basic
I
needs at
don't
their
think
school.
that the majority of, I mean, I think it's rare for parents to really abuse the system, or get more that than they really need, because the vast majority is that learners are not getting what they need,
Yeah.
or that the parents and guardians don't know how to ask for what they need. They just like are trusting that you will provide what their child
Yeah.
needs. So yeah, yeah. But I mean, I've definitely been in meetings, but even that, it's like that parent has, it's like almost a coping mechanism because their child needs so much, that they're like, well, I'm just going to get whatever, like as much as I can, right?
Yeah.
If I know how to do this, I'm going to get as much as I can, even if it's like not reasonable, because who knows when it's going to be taken away, at least, and maybe
Yeah.
it's from their perspective. So
And that was the only thing that
I
I could
get it.
do to try to
Yeah,
be on their side.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I was like, yep, you're up against a really ableist world. So, whatever I can do to help. But
What I think is really interesting about, like, right now in our world is that there's never been as much focus on education, like for better or for worse. With
yeah,
with all the talk about dismantling Department of Ed, people are actually discussing what would happen. And while I still think it's unlikely for it to happen. Um, any attention to education, in my view, is probably a good thing, because at least we're talking about what it would mean. It may not go the way that I prefer it, or want to, or think it's best. Um, but you know, IDEA as a law is flawed.
yeah,
It's a good law, and for the most part, states have been implementing it, very imperfectly. But I'm glad it's there, and I'm glad that the changes that happened in 2004 happened. But we still have a lot of work to do, specifically around the least restrictive environment
yeah.
definition, because it really, I'm not sure if we've talked about this, but the least restrictive
No,
environment
I've argued a
language is
lot of,
actually problematic, because it basically gives the school district license to segregate students.
yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, I've definitely argued with people, on social media as a good adult does about least restrictive environment. Um, Because yeah, a lot of people, and well, I just don't feel like they use the word right, that they're
Yeah,
like, the least restrictive environment would be to segregate the child. And I'm like, the definition is to always be working to work like inclusive practices, to like have inclusive practices for this child. So it's like,
yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
It's not a
okay,
menu. It's not a menu.
maybe,
Like, these are your choices for least restrictive environment. No, like, the least restrictive environment is general education with support. Like,
yeah,
that is LRE. Alternate placement. That's what you call it. So If
Yes.
and there's no continuum of services, which it drives me crazy when I hear continuum of services, but people still use it. And I think I understand what that like I understand what they mean when they say it, but it's not in the law. So it's
Yeah.
the states and districts will interpret the law as a continuum of services. But what what I find problematic about that is you have, okay, well, this service needs to be provided in a particular place. So, well, this student's autistic, they receive this kind of support, therefore, they need to be in an autism classroom. When that just
Yeah.
isn't true. We've
Yeah.
created these arbitrary um, places for students to go when special education is not a service. I mean, scratch that. Special education is not a place; it's a service. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and that is in the law, by the way. That language is actually in the law. So,
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. No, it definitely it needs help. It needs help. Uh, so what do you think is best?
Okay, well, I guess if I were to just to reimagine
Yes,
what
do
things
that
should be like, sure, yeah.
because I don't feel like I actually know. Like whenever I'm like,
Well,
I don't know,
I mean, I have an idea. I don't think that this is completely, I don't think I've completely thought this through necessarily. But I think that for the most part, it shouldn't matter where a student lives. Um, that shouldn't be the determining factor on whether they're included or not. And right now, that is exactly what happens. So if a student in Georgia has Down syndrome and it is in a school district, then most likely they're going to be segregated into a classroom with students with intellectual disabilities, unless the parents um, advocate for inclusion or to be inclusively placed. And then that's not even to say whether or not they're supported, right? But if they live in Cecil County, Maryland, with the same profile, they're included. So it's really zip code that determines whether or not a student experiences authentic inclusive education. So how I imagine that differently is that there's some accountability that would have to come from the federal government, from some sort of federal accountability that if you are not providing these particular services in this particular way, then there would be some sort of repercussion or consequence. Um, and then all the while, meaning that those services should be funded at the rate that was promised, which is the 40% that originally when the law was created, that they said they were going to fund it at 40% for the states, which never has happened. I think the biggest or the biggest amount that it's been funded is like 14%, or
oh
around
my
there.
gosh.
So yeah, I mean, we need federal accountability, we need actually funding, and then we need structures to support actually inclusive practices. And you and I know, and probably your listeners know, that there's examples of inclusive practices all around the country. State of Washington is a great example. They're like all in. They're
Yeah.
all in on trying to make this a reality for all students. We've been working hard in Maryland. There's other pockets around the country. The districts that the Tie Center has worked with and other consultants. We're all working towards the same idea, um, but it's not fully realized yet. And some people
Yeah.
don't even realize that there's a problem. That some people are like, well, this is just how it is, and of course we segregate learners with disabilities with an intellectual disability because that's just how we've done it for years. So there's a it's a big problem. so
Yeah.
um, so yeah, I
Well,
don't know
even
where you start exactly. Fully funding IDEA would be nice. I think that probably is one of the first things that probably should happen even
yeah.
before changing IDEA. Because another thing that we talk about a lot is that inclusion doesn't actually cost any more money. It's just about reallocation of resources, which conservatives, if you're listening, you should love that. You should absolutely love that inclusion does not cost any more money, and that we should be looking at how we are spending and allocating resources. I mean, I'm a former conservative and a fiscal conservative, and I love that.
Yeah.
Like let's actually look at what we're spending money on because we could probably do it better. So I don't think that this inclusion is really like a left right thing. I think it's really like it really scratches everyone's back. Like it
Yeah.
like when you really look at it. Um, so I just think like words like equity and inclusion and stuff, those are really they're they those particular words cause a lot of like anxiety in some people.
Yeah.
So we really got to move past that.
We do. I mean, man, that because I actually this weekend I had this like girls' night with people in my neighborhood. And I mean, a few of us voted differently. We do not all vote the same. And I've actually had this conversation happen before, but we were talking about like um equity. Oh no, we were talking about critical race theory,
Uh-huh.
and which is different. But I've had this conversation with inclusion where when I go to explain it, like the people in my life who are Republican or conservative, they're like, "Oh, well, if that's what it is, then I'm okay with it." I'm like, "Well, good news, because that is what it is. Like that's what I do. Like that is
Yeah.
100% what it is. We're not saying like and I actually just and I don't know if this is true. I should probably look into this more, but I just saw this video of this guy explaining um they did these brain scans of like what parts of the brain work just like throughout the day for people who identify as Democrat and Republican. And it talked about how people who identify as Republican, like their amygdala gets a lot more work throughout the day. And that's like I mean, I thought amygdala was a lot about emotions, but the guy was saying that it's a lot of fear.
Huh.
It's like
Interesting.
and yeah, I should send this to you because I thought it was really interesting and it made me want to look into it more because when I do talk to people who do get worried about like LGBTQ, I mean all the things in the Department of Education, like Title IX, all the
Hmm.
gender and uh oh my gosh, equality, like
Yeah.
whatever, all that. Um, and then inclusion with like students with disabilities and like, and then low income, like all those, it's like people have been using them as a fear tactic of like, if we just like let all these people in and give all of our resources to them, like all of our other kids are just gonna fail. And, like
Right.
look at how
Right.
bad this is. And I just feel like people try to make it so scary where in reality, all of the studies that have been done like have never been able to prove that. Um, but like I just like finding that like fear. I mean, and I do a lot of work with people of like figuring out our own biases and like, whatever sort of ableism, racism, sexism that we have from like, growing up in whatever kind of community or culture that you were surrounded by. Um, but I'll go way too into psychology and stuff, so we don't need to do all that. Um,
No,
but
I think that's part of it. The psychology of like the trying to change someone's mind about something. I think that honestly, like hearts and minds, that's a lot of what our work is,
yeah,
um, because that's the barrier that gets us to the actual like nuts and bolts of um, like what the evidence-based practices are to work with learners. You have to get past the hurdle of like these are our kids, like all the students that you just described, learners in
yeah,
Title I schools, learners on the LGBTQ plus spectrum, or like English language learners. Those are all our kids. They're not the other kids. They're all, if they're in our schools,
yeah,
they're our kids. So like, how do we get past that biggest barrier, which is actually believing and thinking that those are our kids. And then once you believe that, then well, what do you do about that?
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of it's psychology, I think.
So I went to this like inclusion conversation in my school district because they wanted to get the community's opinion of like, what are our next steps to making sure that everyone is feeling included. And and what I thought was interesting was that how some, like, because it was a lot of like group work, and then we would talk about it to everyone. And a lot of people had like the baseline of like, you know what, maybe a fully inclusive setting isn't like what's best for everybody. And that was like,
Mm,
and these are like people who are considered for inclusion. But to me, I was like, if that's your baseline, like if you're going into a school being like, well, might not just be for them, like I feel like you have a much higher chance of being like, okay, like, yeah, let's just put them in the special ed classroom. Like that, this isn't for them. It's too hard. They're getting anxiety. It's too much. Instead of being like, okay, they're showing that they are having anxiety. How do we help someone who's having anxiety? Like we don't just
right,
let them
right.
like, yep, go to your other room and go, don't worry about life. We'll figure it out in 20 years when you have to be an adult or something, or 15. But it just and then I don't think I ever thought about it like that. That like if you have this baseline of like, well, there's always the special ed room, then
Mm,
you're gonna way quicker like default to that instead of being like, you know, everyone needs to be in this classroom. And so now there's a problem. It's like, okay, so how are we gonna support you through this problem so you can stay in this classroom? Like, which is just such a better obviously, I'm going to say that's such a better way to look at things. So, what do you feel like the last question, other than our cat tarot reading,
I'm ready. Yeah.
what what is like one thing that you feel like people in schools right now who aren't in leadership roles, like what could they do to increase inclusive practices, even if it's by 1%?
Yeah, that's yeah. Well, number one, I feel your pain. I understand where you are. Um, I think that I think you need to find your people. So that's number one. Find people to like do this work with you. Because if you do it by yourself, I think you'll get burnt out pretty easy. So for me, I was able to find, one or two people in my building to at least be sympathetic to what I was trying to do. And so then I felt like I could at least, try to move things forward. And then if you're in a segregated class or if you're in a special education, a special educator, and maybe you're a co-teacher, just try to think of one or two students to increase the time and the place and the engagement of that student in that school community. And maybe you're not going to be successful in a particular class, but maybe you will be successful in like a school event or school community, because while it's still not inclusion in the way that we would talk about it, it's worthwhile. It's definitely worthwhile. And I think I like being in this role now, and seeing school districts really like implement like authentic inclusive practices, and seeing like where we should be ending up. I think it's hard for me to like, it's like I want to overcorrect. It's like, well, all schools should be doing this, and if schools aren't doing all of this, then well, you know it's just not right, or something like
Yeah.
that. And I think that I've I've really moved beyond that, and like I think any movement toward inclusive education is worthwhile. But I feel like if you do that, you do need to think through like, if it's sustainable, you know,
Yeah.
and it may not actually be sustainable. So, like for my student Damien, who I talk about in our the podcast series Inclusion Stories, Damien, um, it made a difference for him. It made a difference for the students that he was with in those classes. It made a difference for his family, but it didn't make the larger impact that I wanted to. It doesn't mean that it wasn't worthwhile, though.
Yeah. I mean, I think. I have definitely experienced the same thing where I saw the gradual change happen and I was like, I was like, oh my gosh, this works. We have to do it. And then when I was at my next school, I was like, I ignored all of their concerns and was like, no, we're just gonna do it. It's fine. Where like then it was like giving everyone a bad taste of like
Yes. Uh-huh.
inclusive practices. So definitely like celebrating those small wins, finding the like-minded people that are gonna like help support you. I mean, it makes such a difference. I think those are great, great tips.
Well, thanks.
Well, now it's time. Mystic Cat's Tarot card read.
Oh, yes. Okay. How do
Very
I do it?
exciting. So pretty much what I do is I just shuffle it, and then when you tell me to stop, if you want to ask a question, you can, but if you don't have, and it's like supposed to be like an open-ended question. So if you don't have a question, sometimes I just pick a card to like just see how my day is going, kind of.
Uh, yeah, so give me an example of a question.
So like one of the first questions I asked was like, like where is my career gonna go, or where is my small business gonna go by the end of the year? Like, how am I gonna feel in my small business?
Okay. Okay.
Sometimes I ask like, I don't know, how are my family and I doing? Or like, I try really, I don't know. But some people just say like, just pick a card and let's see what it says.
Okay. Okay. Let's talk about the my community. So, what's in store for my, my community, my zip code. Let's just say that. And zip code in Georgia. Should I say the zip code? I don't know.
You probably don't have to, I mean, if you
I
want.
I won't
I
say
have a
it.
lot of stalkers, so
I won't say it.
I'm
I
just
won't say
kidding.
it. If
Yeah.
if you've listened to me for any length of time, you probably know where I live. So, what's in store for my community in 2025? Let's do that.
Okay. Should I stop now?
Yes.
I felt
Yes.
I felt it here. Okay. Let's see. Ooh, we got an upside down, the sun. Look how cute it is.
What
I
does
can
it
turn it
say?
around. Just the sun, but I have to look in my book.
Okay.
So it takes me some time to because I have to find it because I'm not a professional tarot card
No
reader.
problem. Yeah, actually, I did. Can I tell you just a quick story? So
You can
my
definitely because I'll have to look through my book to find the sun.
my brother and sister-in-law, we did this. When was it? When was it for? Hold on. Oh, it was the autumnal equinox. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, so we were
I support
there
it.
in the end of September. So like September. Yeah. And so that's, that the equinoxes. So
Yeah.
we just had one winter solstice, and so um they have these cards, the tarot, and I don't know what deck it is, but they're tarot
Yeah.
cards, and there was this whole ceremony, and we lit candles and stuff like that, and
That sounds like
we all
fun.
selected a card, and I don't remember what mine was, but yeah, they had the book like that, and they would open it up and read it. So yeah,
Oh, well, that's nice because the only tarot card readers I've been to, I mean, they're usually at like events or something,
right.
and they'll like pull cards and be like, "Oh, this card," like they'll just tell me, and I'm like, I have no idea.
Like I don't have the brain space for
I
that,
don't.
but
Yeah, there's no way I can. I'm like still trying to say your last name correctly, and you're like a friend I've had for years now. So for me to
uh,
remember a bunch of cards, it's gonna be too hard.
okay.
Okay, so my friend told me something about when it's reversed like this, that it means there's supposed to be more like reflection or like, so I don't know. She said something like that. Because to me, I always feel like that's negative when it's upside down, because
Okay.
what it says is sadness and unrealistic expectations, which is
Oh,
not a fun thing.
no.
But underneath that, it says, this gal has found the coveted sunny spot. She is happy to lay in the warmth of the light. You have everything you need and can be optimistic for the future. This bright and sunny energy is yours to carry onward. See, so I don't understand why the sadness and unrealistic expectations goes with that.
I don't know either.
Feels like it's fighting each other.
Well, there's always some tension like that, right? You know,
Yeah.
like the
The give and
expectations
take.
and optimism and reality, stuff like that.
But I
All
feel
right.
like you have a very good, like you have a very realistic view of the world, yet you are very optimistic, as I feel like anybody who is in inclusive practices, like we have to be optimistic, or else why would we be doing what we do?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I do carry around a lot of optimism. Um, because I think I've seen what is possible. So that is always like it's like a North Star, you know. You're like,
Yeah,
I know exactly where we want to go, but not everyone is ready, I suppose.
I know. I don't know if people ever will totally be ready. Anyways, well, that's why we keep doing what we're doing.
That's right.
Um, well, thank you so much for being on here today and hanging out with me. Do you want to talk about your podcasts?
Yeah, briefly. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Or
so I produce two podcasts. One's called Think Inclusive, which is for the nonprofit or our nonprofit, the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education. Um, Kayla, you've been on. Have I published your episode yet?
yes.
Yeah, I did. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I did.
Like this last
Uh,
month. It's recently.
yes, that's right. Okay. I have guests on that are involved in the work of inclusion or inclusive education in schools in the community, and we just talk about hopefully practical things that people can use in their day-to-day lives, or learn something a little bit more about inclusion. And so that is a weekly podcast that we produce, and we produce it from September through June, and we have over 170 episodes from like over the last 10 years. So definitely check that out. And that's at mcie.org/think dash inclusive, or you can just Google Think Inclusive and you'll find it. And then we also have our 5-part podcast series called Inclusion Stories, which is a narrative audio documentary, where I tell the story of families and school districts moving toward full and authentic inclusion for their children and students. And it's a great series, and everyone should listen to it.
It is. I mean, both, and you have like really good people on Think Inclusive. I've like sometimes I see the names and I'm like, what? Like you know her? Like, oh my God, like I get so excited. And then yeah, the inclusive stories, that one was I don't even know how you would like go about editing something like that. It's very impressive.
That was yeah, I still can't believe I did that.
It's
But
really good.
yeah, thank you. That was a lot of work, and I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, well, thank you again for being here. I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
everything that you do.
Oh, hey, you're still here. That was so fun. Wasn't that such a great conversation? So, if you really want to hear more, you need to jump on to coffee and go subscribe. And if you do $5 a month, you also get to be a part of my monthly digital magazine. That is going to be resources and success stories and articles, with the disabled community, with family within the disabled community, teachers, parents. It's going to be amazing. And I'm so freaking excited about it. So that is that. Thank you for being here. Inclusion starts with you, and I just want to help. Have a good day.